Hey friends, it's Rachel. Welcome back to my channel, and today I want to share with you some of my favorite historical mysteries. Last week I introduced you to some of my favorite fantasy books, and this week we're doing mystery. I think that fantasy is probably going to be a bit more popular than mystery. A lot of us here probably have a soft spot in our hearts for fantasy, and if you're like me, then fantasy will always be your first love. However, reading historical mysteries has taught me a lot about writing, especially how not to neglect supporting characters. In a mystery, you're forced to develop your side characters or else you won't have a very compelling mystery. There's also dialogue, character relationships, and how to extend that relationship throughout an entire series. If you're looking to improve your writing, I definitely recommend giving historical mysteries a try if you're not already, especially if you find yourself struggling with dialogue, character relationships, and character motivation. But without any further prevaricating, here are some of my favorite historical mysteries. First up, we have The Way of All Flesh by Ambrose Parry. This book takes place in 1847 in Edinburgh. If I didn't pronounce that right, this is the first book in the Raven, Simpson, and Fisher mystery series, and it follows Will Raven, who is a medical student who is going to be apprenticing under Dr. Simpson, and Sarah Fisher is a maid in the household, but she has plans to become a doctor in her own right. In this first mystery, there are several young women who have been found dead across the city, and each of our main characters has different reasons for looking into these crimes. When I read this book, it felt very slow. It didn't feel like any of the mystery was really taking place. It was focusing more on the medical aspect, and I was kind of like, it's a little bit boring. I don't know if I'm going to pick up the next one, but then I realized it's been building character the entire time, and I really like these characters. And then when the plot started picking up and things started happening very quickly, I was like, I'm definitely picking up the next one. Of course, this is a mystery, but it's the characters that make any mystery series compelling. This is the first book, there is a second book, and the third book will be coming out in October. So if you want to start the series, begin with the first book, The Way of All Flesh. Next up, we have 21 Days by Parry. This is the first book in the Daniel Pitt mystery series. Daniel is the son of Charlotte and Thomas Pitt, who have their own series, and I recommend reading that one first, but you really don't have to. Daniel is a young lawyer struggling to prove himself, and in this book he is given a case where a man is doomed to hang, unless he can prove that he's innocent. Daniel starts to wonder if this man hasn't been framed because he is a biographer. He writes exposés of very famous people. Some of the people that he plans to expose in his latest publication are dead, but they worked for the government, so if this were to come out and be made public, it would be ruinous. Daniel knew these people while they were alive, and he doesn't want to see their names dragged through the mud, but he's also not sure if the man is telling the truth, because one of the characters that Daniel knew that this expose is going to be about worked in the government in Special Branch. He doesn't know if there are any dirty secrets in this man's past that may come to light. He doesn't know who to believe, and to make matters even worse, another of the people that will be exposed in this publication is his own father, so the stakes are very high. This book takes place in 1910 London. So far I've only read this first book in the series, but because I've read the entirety of Parry's Charlotte and Thomas Pitt series, and because Parry wrote it, I know that I'm going to be getting a good mystery, and I completely trust that the rest will be just as good as this one. The next book on the list is The Face of a Stranger, also by Parry. This is the first book in the William Monk mystery series, and it takes place in 1850s London. In the first book, William Monk wakes up in a hospital with no recollection as to how he got there, who he is, or what he does for a living. He can't even remember his own name. When he returns to work at the police station, he's tasked with solving a particularly gruesome murder where a man who comes from a wealthy, influential family was found beaten to death in his own apartment. Along with having forgotten all of the rest of his past, Monk cannot remember how he solves crimes or what it's even like to be a policeman. He doesn't remember the names of any of his contacts, any of his allies, any of his enemies, and from the attitudes of his colleagues at the police station, he gets the impression that he wasn't particularly well liked or a nice person. So he has to tread carefully. His job is at stake. His superiors don't like him, and if he fails to solve this mystery and it becomes evident that he has forgotten everything and lost his memory, he could lose his job, and they could pin the fact that the police have failed to solve this crime on him, and he'll be disgraced. This was a very interesting mystery to read because I've never encountered a mystery where the main character has forgotten all of his memories, and it was an interesting dynamic because usually you meet the characters, you're introduced to them as the story goes along, but in this way, Monk is also rediscovering who he is, so you're learning about him as a character at the same time he's rediscovering who he is as a person. Again, so far I've only read the first book in this series, but because it's written by Parry and I enjoyed the first book, I know that the rest of them are all going to be good as well. Next, we have the Amory Ames mystery series by Ashley Weaver. The first book in this series is Murder at the Brightwell, and this takes place in 1930s England. Our main character, Amory, is married to Milo, who is her playboy husband. He's a bit scandalous, and she's not sure what she wants to do with this marriage. It's kind of on rocky ground. And then her ex-fiancé appears and asks her to help him try to discourage his sister's marriage to this man that he views as unsuitable. So Amory goes with him to the Brightwell, where his sister is staying, and a murder occurs, and her fiancé is arrested for it, and now she has to try to prove who the real killer is to rescue her fiancé's reputation, but then, unexpectedly, her husband Milo shows up. I don't typically like cozy mysteries because mystery typically involves crime. I like it to be just a little bit gritty, not graphic, but enough to be realistic. But I was completely charmed by the characters in this book, particularly Milo. If you write romance or YA and you're trying to make your romantic interest characters more romantic, I would definitely recommend reading this series because Milo is just perfect. He's great inspiration for how to do that very well. Next up, we have A Peculiar Combination, also by Ashley Weaver. This is the first book in the Electra MacDonald series, and it takes place in 1940s London. World War II is raging on, and the main character, Electra's uncle, is a locksmith, but because business has been down during the war, he is forced to use his locksmith skills for less altruistic purposes. Electra and her uncle break into houses and steal valuables, but unfortunately on one instance they are captured by the government, who wants to use their skills to help them retrieve military documents that are in the hands of a man they believe to be a spy. However, when they get there, they find the safe open and empty, the documents are gone, and the man they believe to be a spy is on the floor dead. Electra is forced to work with the major in the military to find the stolen documents, catch the killer, and prevent these papers from falling into enemy hands. When I first started reading this book, I wasn't sure if I would like it as much as the Amory Ames series, but Ashley Weaver does characterization very well, and I will be picking up the next book of this series when it comes out. Moving on, we have In a Far Off Land by Stephanie Landsem. This takes place in 1930 LA. Great Depression is raging on, and the main character Mina's family lives in the Midwest. She has left them and gone to Hollywood trying to get an acting job so that she can send money back and help out their situation. When the book begins, she's attending a party of the rich and famous in the hopes of making connections, and she's about to make a movie deal and sign a contract. Unfortunately, she wakes up the next morning beside a dead actor, and she's forced to go on the run before she's framed for a murder she didn't commit. The only people that can help her and clear her name is Oscar, a Mexican gardener who worked at the dead man's estate. He is facing the threat of deportation, and Max, who is Mina's agent. I love the 1920s, and even though this book takes place in 1930 during the Great Depression, it really captured still that sense of the 1920s in Hollywood, in LA. It was very atmospheric. You felt like you were there the whole time. And this book makes you fall for the characters. The stakes that they face are very high, and just when you think it can't get any worse for them, it does. This is Christian fiction, but it's not thump you over the head with a Bible Christian fiction, so you don't have to worry about that. The characters are very real, they're very much flawed, they're not perfect, they make mistakes, but the point is their mistakes don't ultimately define them. And last but not least, we have The Murder Stone by Charles Todd. This book takes place in 1916 during the Great War, and the main character, Francesca's grandfather, has died, so she goes to his estate to settle his affairs. All of her cousins have died on the battlefields of France. As she's going through her grandfather's things, she receives a note that accuses her grandfather of being a murderer, and she begins to wonder what secrets he may have harbored. Was he, in fact, the sweet man that she thought he was, or is there something darker that she didn't even know about in his past? A series of ominous accidents begin happening, and there's also this strange instruction amongst her grandfather's effects that tell her that the large stone in the back garden called the Murder Stone, where she and her cousins played when they were young, has to be dug up and transported to Scotland. I read this book some years ago, but I remember it being very twisty and just completely blown away by the characters and how well this was done. Charles Todd can capture the atmosphere and the attitudes of the Great War perfectly. And when the antagonist in this book is finally revealed, you just hate them so much. They are a very cruel, hateable villain. I don't know how Charles Todd does this. I don't think I could ever write a villain this hateable as effectively as it's portrayed in this book. This is a thriller with a slightly slower pace to it, but as I said, it's very twisty and it's full of secrets and revenge. So that is it. That is all the historical mysteries I have for you in this video. If you enjoyed, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss out on any future content. I upload every week. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!